الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. سنناقش في هذه الندوة الكتاب الجديد الصادر عن كلمة السباق إلى المكلا مع الكاتب مؤرخ الحرب الدكتور مايكل نايتس. It's my utmost pleasure to welcome Dr. Michael Knights to the Abu Dhabi Book Fair. Dr. Michael Knights is the Jill and J. Bernstein Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, specializing in the military and security affairs of the Arabian Gulf, Iran, and Iraq. He regularly briefs US and European government policymakers, military commanders, and intelligence officials on the evolving realities of the regional battlefields. A military historian by training, and we will go into the details of what that means, right? A military historian. Michael received undergraduate and PhD degrees from the Department of War Studies, King's College, London. He spent extensive time in Yemen, and we're going to talk about this in this panel in the mid-2000s. Spanning some of the 6 wars fought between the Yemeni government and the Houthis. Working Yemeni security forces, he visited all the key battlefields of the current post-2015 war in Yemen, and we're going to also go in details about this, and embedded with Yemeni, UAE, Saudi, and Sudanese forces. He regularly writes on Yemen for academic journals such as Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and you name it, like there are just so many. He has published a number of books, and 2 of them were translated in Kalima, السباق إلى المكلا, and 25 يوما إلى عدن. أهلا وسهلا. Welcome, Dr. Michael. Dr. Michael, first I want, before delving into the details of these 2 books with all the details, the rich details that are in them, I want to ask you about what it means to be a military historian or a war historian even, right? What does it mean? And also, I noticed most of the war historians or military historians I know about, they write about modern, maybe World War II and beyond, but you actually work on contemporary things, right? The last 10 years. What does it mean to write about these things and the last 10 years, and what are the challenges that come with that? So these 2 questions, if you can comment on them.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much to the Abu Dhabi Book Fair for having me. Thank you very much to the Abu Dhabi Language Center, to Kalima, to Profile Publishing, Profile Books in the UK as well, and to everybody who's helped to support the creation of these 2 books, which are the first books about the UAE military in war, not just how the UAE forces have been built or how they were brought together from the different 6 emirates, but also how they actually were employed in warfare and the things that the men and women of the UAE armed forces experienced, particularly in this Yemen war. So this is a very new kind of project for the UAE. It is something that was being done for the first time ever, which is for the government to allow a researcher to understand what goes on within the UAE military and how they undertake military operations. So, as one historian to another, I'm glad you've asked me about what it's like to be a military historian, because I'm very passionate about history. I think that telling the story in the same order that events happened is very important. It sounds like a simple idea. You start at the beginning, you end at the end. It's not like a fiction book where you may have flashbacks, you may wrap the story around with a narrator. History is beautiful because you explain to the reader how things looked to the decision makers as the events happened. And that means there's no hindsight. It's very easy after the events to say, I would have done this different or that different. But the reality is, when you're experiencing historical events in real time, you don't know what the future is going to bring. And you have to understand those events in the same way that they happened, which means moving through the history one day at a time. Now, with military history, I come from Department of War Studies, King's College London, and it's a multidisciplinary degree, meaning that we study the history of warfare, but also how sociology and warfare interact, how society shapes the kinds of wars that are fought, and how wars end up shaping society. We also do a lot of work on psychology, in particular, what creates conflict in societies and what ends conflicts in societies. So it's a part of global history that is well worth studying, because in warfare, you see societies and you see people under tremendous strain. You see them being at their best and you see them being at their worst. So it's a dramatic focus on the human experience. And if you think about all the different types of history, you know, we think of history as, well, let's just say anyway, when you look at military history with a multidisciplinary angle, you're drilling down through all the layers of human experience, our history, our society, our psychology, everything. And you're looking with one particular focus, which is conflict. How does human society function under conditions of conflict? So one of the things I've learned about military history, and one of the reasons why I think contemporary history is really important, is that our memories of an event, the decision makers, their experience of an event, it disappears very quickly. Now, you know, a war that began less than 10 years ago, let's say the current war in Yemen, many of the decision makers, when I would interview them about the military operations 1 year after they had undertaken those operations, they had quite good recall of the detail. After 3 years, less good. After 5 years, much less good. And that means this is history that's disappearing every second. It's like if you put water on the floor in the sun, and after a little while it's gone, as if it never existed. So you have to gather it quickly. And this is why I strongly support the creation of an oral history project here about conflict, because you need to capture these thoughts and feelings. Sorry, I've never done this before. There we go. Yeah. You can tell I've lived in the Middle East for a while. I leave my phone on all the time. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that. So you need to capture these things very, very rapidly. And if you don't, they disappear for good. You know, history is very easy to clean up and to change afterwards if there are no records of events. And military experiences, they often leave either very limited records, or they leave records that are classified and that are buried forever and they never come out. So, you know, these are the reasons why you need to capture the lessons of a military operation very, very quickly. Because just to finish on this, how someone felt during an operation is as important as which unit went to the left and which went to the right and which kind of air power was used. The human factor in warfare is the most decisive factor. How people felt, how brave they were, how they overcame challenges. And that's the part that a nation like the UAE needs to record. Because, you know, you can record your military history and it's dry. It's just this happened, that happened. That's not really very interesting. what's really interesting, and you get a lot of this in these two books, is how Emiratis, under the most testing of circumstances, found courage, found calmness, and undertook a mission and succeeded in their missions. It's really inspiring. When you read these books, even if you're not into military history, it teaches you a lot about your own country. And if these things are not gathered quickly, they disappear, and you never know they happened. Then all you have is Wahdat Karaba, but you don't know the stories behind these people. So we're trying to capture this. On these two books, they're both dedicated to the UAE soldiers who died in the battles. And in the first book, we have a page with those names, and in the second book, we have 2 pages. And they're the same names that you see at Wahdat Karama. They're, this book is really for them, but it's also for all of the soldiers, men and women, who fought in these battles and survived. And this has allowed them to tell their story and for history to remember that story.
Thank you, Michael. There is a lot, actually, to ask about, but I also want to keep time to delve into the books. But when you were talking about military history, and I was thinking psychology, like how does this come into the picture? But now I get it, right? Because you're also talking about things that haven't been analyzed enough in the media. And also, within 3-4 years, even the person doesn't have the time to reflect on because we also, as human beings, change our perspective with time, right? So things are very fresh, right? And so how people felt is extremely important. Does this pose an extra challenge, right? Because these things haven't been analyzed yet. You have interviews. I don't know, right? And does this pose extra challenge?
Well, it's a challenge, but as anyone who's an author knows, the challenges are the good part, right? The easy part is not the fun part.
Yeah.
The hard part is the fun part. It's what challenges you, it's what makes you passionate about a writing project. So the psychology of the individuals really matters in a lot of different ways. I mean, first of all, it brings the story alive. There are some moments in these books that when you read them, your teeth grit because you can feel it. Every part of you is tense until it's over. I remember sitting, particularly in the new book, The Race for Makalla, with one of the commanders as he talked about how he had fought his way out of an ambush, a deadly ambush, with Al-Qaeda all around, firing at them from every direction. A moment when everybody in his unit thought for sure they were going to be killed. They faced that moment. And when we sat and we talked through this part of the battle, it was about an hour and a half of him talking. His memories from 8 years ago were incredibly fresh because we had worked with him for a few days before. We'd started to warm up the memories, and we brought other members from the unit. And this is the thing, a person can forget, but when you get them all together again, they remember. Each one of them remembers a little bit more, and they put all of their memories together, and it starts to create this picture. Well, anyway, it's no exaggeration to say we were sitting there hearing about this moment of battle, and by the end of it, we all went like this. It was so tense.
Fascinating.
By the end of it, we all felt drained. And that's kind of how you feel after you read it in the book. I'll tell you one other final thing about psychology. It's very important when you've been through a dramatic, tense, traumatic experience like battle to talk about it. And in this country, you know, the tradition is for men and women not to talk about their government service, their military service. But I think it's very good to help them to talk about it and to relive it to some extent in a safe environment, because it really lets the feelings out instead of keeping them in. And, you know, you guys here, you're very stoic, as we would say in the English language. You keep things inside and you bury them. And it was a really good experience, I think, for a lot of the soldiers to talk about it, including with each other. Because afterwards they kind of felt better. And I think that's another thing that's a good reason to have military history.
Also, in this discipline, is it important to study something about the military itself, like tactics and like, because you're in the battleground or you're in Yemen and talking to these soldiers, do you need that, or do you work with someone who knows that?
Well, I spent a lot of time in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and Yemen, of course, during various conflicts. So I know modern warfare very well. I've embedded with US forces, UK, Iraqis, Syrians, many others over the years. And so they like the fact they're talking to somebody who's also been in battle. That's helpful because they can tell you kind of understand.
Yeah.
Like, and that puts them at ease because I know in a battle, everything does not go right and everything does not go to plan. In our daily lives, things go wrong. Now imagine being in the middle of Yemen, up a mountain, at night, with battle all around. Nothing ever goes exactly to plan. And it's good for these people as they're speaking to realize this isn't a test. This isn't an exam. This isn't an inquiry. This is history. And however it happened, that's okay. We understand. And that's very good for them to, I think, see. So, yeah.
So thank you, Michael. I can go on and on with this, but I want to ask at least one or two questions about the first book and then most of the questions about the second book, which we're celebrating today. Can we collect the questions to the end? At the end. So my first question is Aden. What motivated you to choose the Battle of Aden as the central subject for this book? And I understand it's a trilogy, right? And what challenges did you face in gathering information and data about the event?
Well, so the first book I did about Aden, because chronologically it comes first. You know, it's the battle in 2015 when the UAE and the Yemenis defend the city of Aden, and I love Aden, so it was great to write about a city that I really love. I got to write that story. And some of the first UAE soldiers I was with in Yemen, they had been involved in the Battle of Aden. So they told me this story, and I said, wow, this is an incredible story. This fantastic, historic city with this, you know, enemy, the Houthis. I've interacted with, you know, I've known them for a long time, and others, Iraqi militias, Syrian militias. You know, I understand this enemy. And so a very strong enemy, a very dramatic story. They have their backs to the sea. There's no room for retreat. The only room left is the water behind them. They have to hold their parts of Aden city, and then with the UAE's help, they have to counterattack and take the city back. So that's the story of 25 Days to Aden. It's about how the UAE was tested a number of times, and each time, and I will say his name, but Mohammed bin Zayed, he was a key player in this. Now, he's very modest. He doesn't want to be mentioned in the book.
You do mention him shortly as also the man.
Well, you have to mention him because without the commander, the story doesn't make sense.
Right.
But I'll tell you something. He asked for half of his name. All the times his name was involved, he said, take out half of them. Because he's very modest like that. And it's quite difficult, actually, to take out his name that many times, but we managed it. So, you know, he made these decisions. We can either quit and leave Aden, or we can double down and stay and win. And he did it. He doubled down each time. And as a result, the Houthis faced their first defeat in the war, and the city of Aden was saved. And it is still under Yemeni government control to this day. And it's getting a lot better. The city is rebuilding, and I'm very happy. And I have many friends in Aden, and they love the book, because the book is really about the city. the city at war, but it's also about the UAE armed forces meeting this challenge. Now, after that, the logical next book to write was The Race for McCullough, which is about the next part of the war in 2015 to 2016, when the UAE and the Yemenis and some Saudis and Bahrainis undertake operations in the east of Yemen to make sure that neither the Houthis nor Al-Qaeda can take over in the chaos of civil war. And, you know, it's another amazing story told by the participants themselves, by the UAE soldiers, sailors, airmen, also by Yemenis and Saudis and Bahrainis. It's their story. And, you know, we can talk about that after we talk about 25 Days to Aden.
Actually, let's, because we're running out of time, and I want to also leave a few minutes for questions. Dr. Ghadami, I know, has a question already. The race to Mukalla, right? So how did you gain such extensive access to key participants involved? And you do mention interviews, but are there documents, archive, or are these things still classified, right? Because every war must have an archive.
Well, so the story of the race for McCullough involves some of the same people who fought the Battle of Aden, but mainly it's a new group of soldiers, sailors, and airmen. After the Battle of Aden, those guys and one particular lady who were involved in that battle, they were given a rest, and a different group of individuals undertook the war in the east, mainly. So after 25 Days to Aden came out, you know, we realized, okay, this works. We can tell a story about the UAE military. It doesn't uncover secrets that need to be hidden. You know, we're careful to protect sensitive information. We also protected everybody's names in 25 Days to Aden. So, you know, it will be Ali T, but we don't give the surname and we don't show faces. We blur the faces. So they learned, okay, security is okay. It's safe. And this really is a great way to tell our national story. Now, the race for McCullough builds off of that. So the system here says we understand now how to do this kind of book. We can do another. It's not that hard. And so we went straight into that. Same way of doing it. It's mainly interviews, but it's also some documentation provided. You know, in a modern military operation, there are a lot, for instance, of PowerPoint slides are made because that's how you brief out a mission every day. There's also, you know, a lot of maps as well. And they get saved and they get preserved for history. And so you get access to those under, you know, special conditions. And then at the end of the whole process, you run the book through what's called a security review. And that's where they just make sure one final time there's nothing in the book that is going to be dangerous or reveal any secrets that need to be hidden.
So as a literary person or historian of literature, I must ask you also this question, that are there thematic or stylistic continuities that the readers of the earlier book will recognize? I know it's a different battle, right, a different part of the war, but do you write them to read like a trilogy, for example? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's correct. Well, it is being written to read like a trilogy, I think for one reason, because unless someone tries really hard, a historian has one voice, and that voice continues through their work. It's not like a novelist maybe who decides to have a different kind of voice or adopt a different perspective, you know, first person, third person, no. With military history, you sort of keep your voice, and these books are meant to fit together. You can even see from the look of them, they have a similar type design. It's the same inside as well. Very good amount of color photographs, many of them declassified from the operation, so you can see what really happened. Very good mapping, 20 maps in each book, which not many military histories do nowadays, in the West even. You know, they don't bother to do really good mapping. So the story is less meaningful for you because you don't really understand how these places relate to each other and why it's significant that someone was lost there and had to be recovered. You don't realize how far away it is, how remote it is. So maps are really important. So, you know, it is going to, the third book that we're referring to, you know, is the potential to write a book about the Red Sea coast operations in 2016, 17, 18, 19, which is where we see the fighting right now with the Houthis. You know, it's important to remember that most of the areas the Houthis are now attacking international shipping from, the Emirates had actually liberated those places back in 2017 before the international community convinced them to pull back under the Stockholm process. So it's kind of a story that connects with the present day. You know, the possibility for a third book about the Hodeidah operations, and that sort of finishes the trilogy. There's a trilogy about the U.S. Army in World War II, which is written by Rick Atkinson. One part in Europe, one part in North Africa, one part in Italy, one part in Europe. And this is a similar kind of idea to that.
So, Michael, how do you describe the challenges that the UAE forces faced in liberating the Zayed Dam and the city of Ma'rib, as detailed in the book?
Well,
and how did they also overcome these?
Oh, of course, yeah. So what's amazing about the story that we tell in the Race for Makalla is that this is a real test of national strength and resilience for the UAE. You know, in 25 Days to Aden, it is a battle that's tough, and when the UAE could either leave and go home or keep going, it always keeps going. But this is what happens in the Race for Makalla, you'll remember, is really, really dramatic test for a nation's strength and resilience. And that is the missile strike at Safa that kills over 50 Emiratis in a single second. And that's never happened before, really, in the history of the UAE. And at the heart of the book, there is this moment when you have undertaken these military operations to help save the Yemenis, to help secure the UAE and the Gulf Cooperation Council states. And then suddenly you get hit very hard. And overnight, you'll all remember it, there are 50 dead Emiratis. And one of the best parts of this book, and I swear you will cry if you read it, is that the nation comes together. Now, you remember what it felt like to be here when that happened. But this tells you what it felt like for them over there in Yemen, because they could tell you were all with them. And you'll see when you read the book that they understand. Some of them go home to see their families. They come back quickly because they were so shocked after the strike. And one of the commanders had the great idea. He said, listen, go home for a couple of days and come back. He trusted them, and they came straight back. But they also came back telling everybody in Yemen, on the battlefront, everyone at home is with us. It's amazing. You know, to take that many casualties in one day when that's never happened before, and then to immediately commit more forces, re-attack, and continue the mission to success. That's something that shows both Emiratis and also other nations that this place has a lot of character and strength. And that's what you need to do if you're going to be a great country.
Beautiful, beautiful. It also makes us appreciate peace and appreciate what these people have done to live now. I have many other questions, but I want to go back to the importance of these books, the importance of building this discipline of military history in the UAE in particular, right? What is the importance of doing this, and how do we go about doing it also? Because it's very interdisciplinary from what I understand from you now.
That's right. It can be interdisciplinary, or it could be simple, or it can be a simple extension of a history department, right? Or a set of courses, for instance. But I mean, the first thing to say is this. I mean, you can build a military history tradition in the UAE that is about reporting on your own history, military history, and on others. I mean, why can't you have PhD historians here who are looking into 19th century German warfare. There's no reason why not.
Yeah.
Your PhDs can go to Germany and do the same, documentary research as anyone else.
Look at the archive.
Right, look at the archives. So it's not all about just Emirati or Arab military history. But secondly, you have a system here, I think, that if it embraced military history, it could really bring your own military history alive as well,
Right.
and preserve it. And that means an oral history project. It means military history museums and exhibits. And it means also commemorating these activities in movies, and documentaries in particular, and in books. I think it's an important thing for Emiratis to record this history themselves. I mean, I've tried my best, but there will be many things I've missed. And that's good because it leaves other things for Emirati military historians to find later and say, well, Mike did his best, but there were things he couldn't understand about the culture. I mean, I tried hard, and a lot of people have helped me on the cultural side not to miss little things. But I still missed a lot of things, I'm sure. Now, the further you get away from these incidents, in some ways, the less sensitive they become. They become more like history. And some of the sensitivities of the moment go away. And maybe you can explore new ideas. So, from my perspective, I would love to see more young Emiratis taught to do contemporary history, including military history or conflict studies. Many of them already go to conflict studies university departments around the world. The Crown Prince being a good example. Also came out of King's College London War Studies, like myself, did his PhD there. So, maybe we can take some of those Emiratis who have come back from abroad with military history training, and then apply them to the subjects here and the history that needs to be recorded before people forget it.
Yeah. So, Michael, I also noticed that these books were published almost at the same time with the English, right? The English appear, and then immediately the Arabic appears. And of course, we thank Kalima for their amazing translation. We salute also the translator, Samer Abu Hawash, excellent Arabic, excellent production, etc. But how does this happen? Do you give them the draft of the book before it's actually published in English? Because it's almost impossible, right?
Quite complicated, and not without its challenges. But look, first of all, I'm really glad this one is coming out in Arabic first, right? Because the last one, it came out in English a little earlier. This one is coming out in Arabic a little earlier.
Wow.
But that's the way around it should be. Because, who are the primary readers of this book? Young Emiratis, typically. I mean, what I hope is that each one of these books gets given to every military cadet, that they're in all of the libraries. Because, there's no better way to learn about national service than to listen to these people talk about their experience of it. So you'll see the English soon enough, but I'm really glad this one came out in Arabic first.
So you really think the audience is for Emiratis, mostly? More than, historians of war, or there are a lot of human, experiences there. And I think there is a lot for even literary scholars in this book.
Well,
do you think the audience is mostly Emiratis?
Well, I think the audience should be mostly Emiratis. And I think over time that will be the case. I mean, there's certainly a lot in these books that fascinates Western scholars of Middle Eastern history, Western scholars of current affairs, and Western scholars of how warfare is changing. Because the thing is, you guys have done things that we are now seeing in Ukraine, that we are now seeing in the Red Sea fighting with the Houthis and in other places. But you did them first, 5 years before. So, as a result, you can learn a lot about the future by reading history, especially contemporary history, because it is, as they say, the first cut of history. Right. And you need to do that. If you read these things, you get a lot of insights into how the wars are being fought right now and how they will be fought in 5-10 years' time.
And you mentioned that you have friends in Aden, for example, friends in Yemen, and when you take these books in Arabic, how does it feel that these experiences that started from there are going back to where they started, right? How does it feel?
It feels great. For me, being able to interact with all my friends, for instance, from Aden, and now that this is coming out from Makalla, from Marib, they love to see the place that they come from described in these loving terms, because I love these places. It's a shame that they had to have war and battles there. I've known them in peace and I've known them in war. And I mean, for instance, Marib was really small before the war. Now it's almost kind of becoming the capital of Yemen in some ways. So war has sort of changed it in good ways and in bad ways. And with Aden, it's recovering very well now. It looks better, I think, in some ways than before. The war has brought out the best in them. And Makalla is a beautiful city as well. I'm really glad to see that recovering as well. So, it's great that all the friends in Yemen can receive these books and read them too.
Excellent. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. We have the first question by Dr. Al-Ghazami, and then the second question from the young lady in the front. There is a microphone. I was told there is a microphone.
I can hear just about.
Dr. Abdullah Al-Ghazami, the famous literary critic.
I joined when you mentioned the King's College in London. You are from? Yes. My grandson graduated from the same college last year.
A military historian too?
Yes. No, business. I appreciate your talk. And I think I will like your book as well, because I like history. But at the same time, I'm interested in memory and how memories can control our thinking and our acting as well. Surely, I agree with you when you say if you forget, you will never learn. But what about if we don't forget, we'll never forgive as well? I know this is a problem, of course, but how you deal with this saying, as long as you are a historian, and you will surely, your work, your job is to make us not to forget. In the same time, if we don't forget, we will never forgive. How your thoughts about this?
That's a great
Just,
question.
I need your thoughts,
question.
that's all.
Yeah,
Thank
that's
you.
a great question.
It's a
Great question. So, I mean, look, I'll give you some personal family background. My family is split between England and Ireland, and they don't get on. We have our own little civil war, over the last 100 years. And so my mother's from Ireland, Catholic. My father's from London, Protestant. They should not really have been allowed to get together. So when she was young, she couldn't go home, and my father couldn't go there because they would have been targeted. But I can go there now, and I can speak to my cousins. Why is that? Because of time, because of the healing effects of time, because each generation has a better experience than the last generation. In my experience of all the wars I've been in, it's the only way to end a war is that the last generation has a better experience, and then the next generation has better experience. Generations are the only way to really end major conflicts. But you're right, I'm a historian. I'm there to teach people to remember things. I think for me, it's about how much love you bring to a story. You love for the people involved, to teach them to forgive themselves, for the things they had to do or for whatever it was that makes them sad about the conflict. Love for the places. It's hard to have love for the enemy. It is hard. And I'm not an impartial person. When I connect. I know who I think is the good guys and the bad guys. And obviously the other side don't feel that way. But that's my weakness as a historian. I accept it, that I have a position. Now, one day somebody will write these military histories and they will have no position. And they will be they'll have a different feel. But anyway, I think it's about how much love you put into a story. People can feel it.
Thank you, Michael. The young lady, and then Dr. Talib al-Rifai, also the famous novelist.
It is? Okay. I read the book of 25 Days to Aden, and I really liked it. And my question here is, were there any risks or fear for the people who were involved in this? Because, you know, when I read the book, it was easy for me to make connections of the role of the UAE in the region and the aid to other countries, along with the military help as well. So it made me appreciate that and love my people more and even more. And it made me concerned about their safety as well. I'm really concerned about everything that is happening in the region right now about the safety of our people. So that's my question.
Thank you.
Another great question. So one of the things about 25 Days to Aden is that the number of forces involved is quite small for most of the battle. And these are all special forces who've done multiple tours of Afghanistan typically. And it was quite difficult to get them to admit that they were scared at any point because they're tough guys. Even Dr. Aisha, who is the main female character in the book. What's good about the race for McCullough is that some of the very raw emotional moments are captured. And we had some of that in 25 Days to Aden, but there's even more of it in the next one. I found the interviewing in a lot of this to be very emotional because, for instance, the major mass casualty event at Safa, some people simply cannot talk about it because of all the things they saw. Really, really intense psychological trauma. And that's all you need to say is that they couldn't talk about it. And it lets the reader, it kind of says more than words. No words says more than some words in that case. So yeah, there's a lot of emotion with them. The way you process emotion here, particularly the men, they keep it down. But it can't, that's why interviewing is great, especially if they think it's somebody who's also been in war and they can trust. Because it allows them to feel their feelings. And that's a very rare thing here, especially for men.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Talib.
Hi. Thank you for the lecture. I enjoy it. As a historian, I think we are passing our region and also all the world through a very difficult turn, and it is a historian time. As a writer, which is, a lot about the area, how you look to our future coming to this area?
The futuristic question.
Yeah, so I guess I'd say this. When you live in a region, you can sometimes feel that what's happening to you in your region is unique. And there's no doubt this region faces enormous challenges. It's tough neighborhood, as they say in English. However, I feel like the whole planet is heading into a much tougher period. Whether it's great power competition and the return of a Cold War, whether it's the climate issues and other sustainability issues, I think things are going to be really crazy in the next 20 to 40 years. And I don't think that's going to be limited to this region. We've been used in the last 30 years, 40 years, to this being the part of the world that has significant conflict. but I don't think that's going to be the case. And Ukraine is a good example. You know, those kinds of things are spreading much more widely. And a lot of the things that were safety catches that stopped that from happening, those systems are decaying. So I feel like we are in that 1910 moment or that 1935 moment where we're between some major wars or we're just slightly ahead of them. But on this region, I mean, one thing I'll say is this. Sometimes I see better decisions coming out of this region than my own region. And I think that's because people here have really committed themselves to learning from history, and they understand the consequences of the wrong action or inaction. And, you know, you've got some really, in this place, the UAE, you have some very cohesive leadership here. And that is needed more than ever. The fact is, it doesn't matter how big a country you are, what really matters is how capable your leadership is.
Yeah.
Without leadership, you have nothing. With leadership, anything is possible. Leadership deficit, I think, is the key problem in international affairs at the moment.
I think this is a beautiful note to end our panel with. Thank you, Michael. I really look forward to welcoming you in the Abu Dhabi Book Fair next year to discuss the third book. Ladies and gentlemen, this was Michael Knights, and he will be signing his book on the side of the panel. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for attending.